From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to HPS Insights, a podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies, analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host, Megan Pennington, Managing Director here at Hamilton Place Strategies, and I'm thrilled to be joined by several of my awesome colleagues for today's HPS Insights episode. We have one of our partners, Andrea Christensen, along with Gina Kim, Maggie Wang, and Parker St. Jean. We will be talking about the latest iteration of a quarterly project they recently completed called the Capital Chatter Analysis. The Capital Chatter Analysis, started in April 2021, is a quarterly analysis of the tweets posted by members of Congress. Using original data analysis, the team is able to search for relevant keywords and determine trends around what members are tweeting about. This quarter's results had some super interesting takeaways, and I'm really excited to talk about it with you all today. Andrea, Gina, Maggie, and Parker, welcome to HPS Insights.
It's really great to be here. Thanks, Megan.
So what emerged? What was the biggest takeaway from this quarter's analysis?
I would say the dominant topic of the quarter was definitely infrastructure on just a lot of different dimensions. It has been a really steady topic over the year. It's consistently been one of the key topics, but with the bipartisan infrastructure package in the fall, as well as a lot of the momentum around Build Back Better, it really emerged as the dominant topic of the fourth quarter. I would say overall, something that we noticed looking back at the past year was we think of members of Congress on Twitter as, being more driven by engagement and media trends and wanting to throw shade at other members of Congress. But if you look at the numbers, what they tweet about is really driven by legislative momentum and executive decisions to a degree that I think I personally was not really expecting, but it turned out to be, a little optimistic or a little hopeful to, recognize that members of Congress really are focused on legislating, at least when they're posting on Twitter.
That's good to hear. That's good to know that what they're talking about actually aligns with what we've sent them there to do. Tell me, team, what, if anything, surprised you about this quarter's Capital Chatter Analysis results? Were there any that surprised you that kind of seemed outside of the norm, or, how have these results differed from quarters past?
Picking up right off where Gina just talked about infrastructure, I think it was pretty interesting how we kind of saw members of Congress Twitter accounts mirror the news coverage of infrastructure. We saw the gradual increase starting from Q1 to Q4 as this infrastructure package kind of began its negotiations and then culminated with the signing in early November. And then we kind of compare that to what we saw in the topic of education in schools. Here in the DC area, we had the Virginia governor's race in early November, and we had a lot of coverage about schools, education, parents in schools, and we really did not see that translate into the education category for member of Congress's Twitter accounts. It's important to note that this education category includes a variety of terms, not just schools, kind of focusing on higher ed and tuition, but we really did not see an increase like we have in other newsy and flashy hot topics on the member of Congress Twitter accounts. So it just kind of shows that although Twitter activities usually at times will follow what's in the news cycle, there's a few hot and interesting topics that won't really translate in the member of Congress Twitter accounts.
That's super interesting and really surprising. I mean, given just how robust the conversation is on schools in the media, I mean, you can't watch a news channel without hearing the debate over kids and schools and masking. So it's interesting to see that's not coming through in the Twitter analysis, though. I wonder if it's maybe a recognition that a lot of this is happening. A lot of these decisions are happening on the local stage. And so federal lawmakers kind of, while they might have opinions if asked in media interviews, maybe that's just not driving their Twitter editorial calendar, which wouldn't be altogether surprising.
Yeah. And I'd add too, I mean, generally tweets related to COVID have also just plummeted over the course of the year. I mean, from a high of 27,000 in Q1 to 8,000 in Q4. Wow. And so, I mean, and that is clearly divorced from the Omicron surge. And so even as, more attention and there's more cases than ever before, you're just not seeing the Twitter traffic around that you were also. So that's also interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Incredibly notable. It's an interesting commentary on how to like the perception of what people are talking about the most. And then this Twitter analysis actually keeps us honest on, okay, what topics are really coming through and being able to look at it in a quantified way is pretty interesting. So in your write-up of the analysis, your team noted that congressional Twitter can be a barometer of both parties' political and communication strategies. How can that observation help folks understand different tweeters' political and communications goals?
Right. I think just also jumping off of what everybody else has said, Twitter can be a place that can be very tactical. Like, for example, even in extreme circumstances, when you look at when members tweet, everybody tweets during the week. Nobody tweets over the weekend. So when we think about Twitter, we thought, well, it'll be interesting to look at, now that we have the full year of data, look at some of the bigger topics that have been really consistently in the national and media and political debate. We looked at inflation, we looked at COVID vaccines, and we thought it was very interesting that, for inflation, it's a very big topic for everybody because of, stimulus packages, prices are going up. So for consumers, this is a very salient topic. Google Trends data has shown that American consumers have consistently been very interested in the topic of inflation. But when you really look at how members tweet about inflation, Republicans really started tweeting about inflation in the middle of the year when I think Axios came out with a report that said GOP circulated a memo that said, there's this public concern and fear about rising prices, so members should lean into that. And Democrats really only started talking about inflation a lot more throughout the end of the year, where Build Back Better was branded as the solution to combating inflation. So that's sort of a way that we thought was a very good window into just seeing and having that as an indicator of how members are communicating to their constituents.
This is making me think that back from my years on the Hill, as Andrea knows, we often would receive message guidance from the caucus or the conference in the House, like whoever whatever message leadership had set for the week or for the month. There was always tweet this or place an op-ed on this. It would be interesting if the leadership in both chambers knew how we did our text analysis, because then they could probably keep a little scorecard on who was staying on message and who was not. The members probably think, oh my gosh, we don't need anybody tracking this.
So kind of building off what members of Congress use their Twitter accounts for, it is important to remember that this is one of the ways becoming more prominent on how they're communicating with their constituents. So in each of our quarterly analyses, we've looked at the top topic mentions and commemorative events, which we've included terms like celebrate, honor, today is, anniversary of, has consistently ranked in the top 3, if not number 4. So this just kind of underscores that while member of Congress Twitter accounts are tweeting about policies of the current day, they're also tweeting about daily events, congratulating people in their districts. They're tweeting. We saw Veterans Day was in Q4, so they're tweeting about honoring all veterans. So this is still one of the primary communications tools that these members of Congress are using to update their constituents on regular activities that may not be hot, political, topical.
That's a great takeaway. And I guess it makes sense. I think members of Congress are always trying to figure out what's the most effective way to meet their constituents where they are, to get the information to them that they need, whether it's about how to get in touch with the caseworker or it's to tell them about work that they're doing in Washington that directly affects their constituents back home. So, I of course am sympathetic, as Americans, habits for consuming information change. And obviously think of the incredible changes we've seen even over the past 15 years since Andrea and I have been out and working for members of Congress. When I can remember when I worked for Senator Barbara Mikulski, I was there when she got her first Twitter account, and it was it was for the campaign. It was on the campaign side, and she just had a separate BlackBerry, and she thought the BlackBerry was her Twitter. I mean, this was like super new to many of these people, and look how it has totally changed and become an incredibly important part of the way members do their work. And I can even say, even before I left working on the Hill, there were times where, before some notable event occurred, you would, issue a statement. But by the time I was leaving, sometimes it would just be a tweet, because reporters are looking for reactions on Twitter. And that the fastest way to get your voice out there and to let everybody know where you stand on something like, ratifying the Iran nuclear deal, or considering a trade authority, it was like something would happen on the floor and immediately folks would be tweeting. And that was like the fastest way to get your message or your perspective out there. So it's kind of wild to think where we'll be 15 or 20 years from now. We'll be like fully in the metaverse. I don't know. Maybe it'll just be an avatar giving a statement in the metaverse, and like the members never even have to like go to a press conference. That would be crazy. Why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll come back and hear a little bit more about this project. We'll be back with you on HPS Insights in just a minute.
On the first Friday of every month, HPS analyzes the latest jobs and labor market data in a digestible format. Sign up for our reports at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or on Twitter at HPS Insight.
Welcome back to HPS Insights. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Andrea, Gina, Maggie, and Parker. Hi, everybody. They're here to talk to us about their quarterly capital chatter analysis. So let's get right back into it. Are there any voices that are being left out of the Twitter conversation? Any members of Congress that are notably not tweeting? If so, what does that mean, if anything at all?
So we did, when we were looking, we saw that, basically every member of Congress also has a Twitter account. So what we thought was more notable as we were tracking the leaderboard is it's not that members of Congress are being left out. We did see that some members of Congress are more vocal or more active on Twitter than others, including in the fourth quarter. We saw one member in particular who has been really vocal over the year be a little less active.
Yeah, and kind of building off of that, taking a step back and looking at the total tweet volume over the course of the year, Democrats do tweet more than Republicans. Just over 60% of all tweets that came from congressional Twitter accounts in 2021 came from Democrats. And even as we saw the overall tweet volume decrease from quarter one through quarter four, we did see Democrats top Republicans in overall volume in each of the four quarters. Each quarter, we put out a leaderboard of the top 10 most frequent Twitter accounts. And since we have this full year data, we're able to put that into a full year leaderboard. So unsurprisingly, Senator John Cornyn of Texas led our quarterly leaderboard for quarters 1 through 3. And as Gina alluded to, he unfortunately did not come in first place in Q4. He was topped by Representative Jayapal by, I think, just around 30 tweets. So interesting tidbit there. But looking at the overall aggregate of tweets from Senator Cornyn, he sent out just over 6,500 tweets in 2021. And that was more than 1,000 tweets compared to the second place finisher. So Senator Cornyn is definitely getting his tweets out there.
That is so interesting. Senator Cornyn, of course, is known for being a prolific tweeter. And I think, Senator McConnell is I'm sure, grateful to have him he always has a little snark. He's always bringing a little humor to his Twitter game. But that's notable that Congresswoman Jayapal outpaced him at the end of 2021. I mean, I think we all saw her, of course, out in the news and doing her thing, trying to negotiate and get the president's big domestic spending package over the finish line. Of course, we all know how that worked out, at least at the end of last year. I guess we'll have to stay tuned and see if she can keep up her pace as she's taken on 2022. Well, cool. So how has the process for this analysis changed over time? What have you guys learned by engaging with this work? And, do you kind of update your approach or add other things in? What have you learned, and how have you shifted your process?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting process over the course of the year. I mean, we started off just kind of wanting to know, hey, what are members of Congress tweeting about? How, like, what's new, what's exciting, how do things change, what's the volume look like? And we've kind of added more layers of nuance each quarter. I think adding in the Google search trends for this analysis was really interesting in terms of, the inflation findings. And we also looked at, who's being mentioned more frequently, things like that. And we have some other kind of interesting potential insights coming up in future iterations of this. And maybe Maggie, you want to speak to kind of the additional influencer aspect we're thinking about here. But it's been fun to think about, okay, what are we doing? How can it be better? And trying to make it more insightful each quarter.
Right. And it's not just us. We've gotten a lot of good buy-ins from the rest of the firm and other people. We've grown our team and we've had a lot of support from people giving us ideas. Oh, what about, this? What about that? And one of the new things that we're sort of trying to, experiment and has already been operational a little bit. We used it in this most recent analysis to see which members are mentioned the most by other members, not just who's tweeting the most. One of our findings this time was that, President Biden and Vice President Harris really gets tagged a lot by members of Congress, much more than any of the House, Senate leadership and other members of Congress. So we are trying to continue to do this sort of work, and we want to be able to, in the future, look at things like, for example, which journalist perhaps interacts the most with members of Congress, which trade associations interacts the most with members of Congress, and vice versa. So we have a lot of these little projects and items coming down the pipeline. So please stay tuned.
I bet Senator Manchin's name might be mentioned a lot, but not tagged. Because, can you imagine? You get into a game of what kind of shade are you willing to throw? Are we going to go all the way to tagging the person that you're going to call out? I don't know. That might be an interesting discussion to be able to observe inside a congressional office.
Right. But even then, we had a lot of internal discussions on how we're going to present the data. So we did actually do a quick search of, how many times, say, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who were, in the news a lot, to say the least, were mentioned. But even then, people like Speaker Pelosi were very much mentioned more than Senator Manchin was. So I feel like this kind of goes into some of what we think members of Congress are tweeting or what they're actually tweeting kind of, dynamic.
It also felt like people were, generally people were falling in line with their party line. So you saw a lot of committee chairs getting a lot of mention, House leadership in general received a lot of mentions. So it might be that while there's a lot of internal or off the record seething between members within the Democratic Party, it would be unlikely that they would vocally attack another member of their party on Twitter.
Well, maybe there's hope for some civility after all.
This is going back a little to the methodology question, but something that we did this time that I think would be really interesting to do in future full year analyses or other, time-oriented analyses was the time series data, because that allowed us to see how specific moments or specific events really drove spikes in conversation. So something that we saw looking at mentions of COVID and the vaccine was that specifically, developments around the vaccine seemed to cause more spikes in conversation than, actual changes in caseloads or the underlying status of the pandemic. In particular, we saw that there was a large spike among GOP tweets after President Biden announced his vaccine mandate that would impact 100 million workers at private companies, whereas we didn't see a similar spike when he announced the federal vaccine mandate. So it just demonstrates that to the GOP or, to Republican members, the private mandate was much more of an impactful development or announcement than the one that would specifically only impact the federal sector.
Cool. That's very interesting. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. It was really great conversation. We hope that you will come back. Any last thoughts before we close out our episode today?
We are always looking to improve and, look into new insights, look into new ways of displaying the data, new topics to explore. So if you do have any requests or suggestions, I think we're always open to considering that. So let us know.
Yes, absolutely. Listeners, if you have any suggestions, you can always reach us at content@hamiltonps.com. We will pass along any tips or suggestions you have to our fantastic Capital Chatter team. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into another episode of HPS Insights. A huge thank you to our guests today, Andrea, Gina, Maggie, and Parker, the Capital Chatter Congressional Twitter Analysis team. You can find the complete Capital Chatter analysis at hamiltonplacestrategies.com, along with more information about Hamilton Place Strategies' work and all of our podcasts. We're also on Twitter at HPS Insight. I'm your host, Megan Pennington. Thank you for listening and hope to see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insights and follow us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.